thank you everybody for joining us today for this Stellenbosch Graduate Institute book club. What we do in this book club is that we review a book with somebody that either as ourselves or when we have the opportunity with a guest such as our guest here today, Yendor Felgate from Being Human Group. And then occasionally we have the actual author with us and then we work through that. Okay, so I've known Yendor for a long time, so it's always hard to introduce him. He's one of those rare and strange animals that actually understand what's going on in HR. I think often HR is a lot about compliance. And I think possibly maybe the first or second person I ever met that was strategic about HR is joining us here today. Yendor has got an illustrious career in banking and management consulting, and he is now running Being Human Group that he co-founded, and they're focusing on various aspects of human resources, but also helping people to, I think it's in the name, to be more human. And they do a lot of work with Gallup and strengths coaching, taking a positive psychology view of the world. I hope I did it right, Yendor, and that's actually who you are. All good.
Not bad.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and we are reviewing a very interesting book. The author, sorry, I'm just getting to my notes there. Rod Wagner and James K. Harter. They wrote the first Break the Rules, and then they followed that up with 12 Elements of Great Managing. And the intriguing part about this is that it's based on surveys of 10 million workplace interviews and kind of boiling them down into 12 kind of core or distinct points. And we're very delighted to ask Yendor today to help us understand this a bit better. Yeah, and maybe over to you, Yendor. You tell us what you want to tell us, and we're here for you. If you've got any questions at any point in time, please feel free to type them. There's a box on the bottom left-hand corner where you just type the question. We'll take those questions and pose them. So that is there for you. If you want to make a comment, you can also do it there. No problem. And then, yeah, I think we take it as it comes. Thank you, Ko.
Fantastic, Rian. It is nice to be invited, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think we were quite intrigued by the invitation because in terms of our business, we use the 12 steps to great management quite often from a practice and client point of view. So it was very interesting to revisit the book and to read it with a fresh perspective and say, well, if I'm coming to the book for the first time, what is the value of it? And that's what I'm going to try and bring to life in the session today. So my name is Yendor Felgate. We run a group called the Being Human Group, and our name tells you what we are involved in. So we seek to empower people, positively disrupt workplaces, and change the way people lead by using the science of strengths. For us, in layman's terms, strengths is the talents that people have, the innate talents that people bring to the workplace, and the job and really the core principle of the book is how do we identify and leverage those talents to best effect from a management perspective. And yeah, just a signpost, when Gallup talks about managers, they're talking about those managers in the mid-tier. So they do differentiate between leaders and managers. Leaders are managers of managers, whilst managers work with teams. So we're talking about that mid-tier group, what they can do in terms of leveraging great employee performance. And this topic, of course, has never been of greater importance. I think the pandemic has changed the rules somewhat, and we think accelerated some of the issues that this book is proposing. So we think it's relevant. We think some of the issues are now even more topical as we move to the so-called new normal and remote working and all that good stuff. What managers do now has become even more important. What we love, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
I'm very intrigued in what you're saying, Yendor. Because it's almost as if we now need to be managed more. And so we'd love to kind of. I'm reflecting on my own practice as a manager, kind of post-COVID, or even during COVID. During COVID, we kind of all had to go into crisis mode and kind of reconnect with staff on virtual platforms and those types of things. So I'm very intrigued on your perspective in terms of saying, well, what does it actually mean for us, and yeah, in terms of what you were alluding to, that it is different now.
Yeah. So, Rian, our view and some of the work that we've been doing with our clients indicates the following. If you weren't a great manager and you went into the pandemic, you haven't recovered.
Cool.
I think we can be almost as blunt as that. If you were a great manager and did some of the things that the 12 elements are suggesting, I think you become stronger. You've differentiated and you're going to exit into the new normal. I mean, we're not going back. I mean, I think that's the reality. You're going to exit into the new normal on the front foot. And I think those are going to be, if you can use that terminology, the winners of that. And it's, I think the 12 Elements is came out in 2006 and it was ahead of its time. And it's a bit like the climate debate is people have been telling us for years, suddenly it's on our doorstep. And I think that's what the pandemic has done, is accelerated the importance of some of these things. Whether you believe that Gallup got it right or wrong, I think is less an issue. But the fact remains is what managers do right now is mission critical.
Absolutely. Cool. Excellent.
Okay. So let's just jump straight into the book then, and so on. So the 12, there are 12 elements of great managing Gallup things. It's based on 10 million interviews. One of the things we've always been impressed on with, and we're a Gallup licensed training partner, so we have a bit of an inside view on this, is the immense data that Gallup collects. It's been collecting since the turn of the last century, starting with people with white lab coats and clipboards asking Midwestern housewives which brand of soap powder they wanted. That morphed into political, and you'll probably see the Gallup polls around politics. And then behind that is an immense interest with the emergence of Don Clifton around the science of human behavior. So the genre of the book is what we call behavioral economics. And the idea really is you can make more money if you understand how people behave. So this would be things like, what do customers buy? What are their interests? What are their habits? What are their experiences? And there's a whole genre of economics that sit around behavior. It's predisposed on what we call positive psychology. Positive psychology emerges in the 40s. Don Clifton from Gallup is one of the pioneers of this, and it really thinks a little bit about, let's move away from therapy-based models where we are fixated with fixing people to turning it on its head, look at the average person and say, well, what do they bring to the party? What can their contribution be? What are the innate talents that they bring? So there's a whole genre of positive psychology, and the book fits within that. And then, of course, the magic, and I say this, the magic sort of thing they put on the table is this whole concept of employee engagement.
Yeah.
And so, sorry, you wanted to ask a question?
No. So they were like principally some of the first people that started talking about this, yeah?
Yeah, so Gallup would be acknowledged as one of the pioneers of employee engagement, and there are many now. I mean, as an area of discussion, employee engagement has really just morphed and grown at an exponential rate, and it's based on this idea that people have an innate need to achieve, and they come to the predisposition is people come to work trying to do a good job, which is very different to sort of, turn of the century labor economics or Fordism that suggests that we want one size fits all in a production line. And by the way, we have to micromanage because people are lazy and they're out to steal and they're out to break things and so on. So, the positive psychology approach is, well, people are there to do a good job. It's our job as managers to help them.
Although, it's intriguing because I'm also finding that the millennials are often accused for not wanting to achieve, or even Gen Z now.
Yeah.
people that are coming towards in terms of saying, well, I don't have an inherent need to differentiate myself from others. I feel the world should be a better place, me in it. So I'm willing to suspend the competitive nature of man temporarily, and that
Yeah.
also is a very intriguing change in behavior. So
Yeah.
um, I,
Yeah.
I,
So,
I
sorry.
think it's kind of the next level to saying the innate need to achieve, which was, as you said previously, kind of more negative. I think
Yeah.
we kind of gone through this phase, and I think it is now a new phase.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think that's great insight, Rian. I think what Gallup would say and what the book would claim would be the following: is the nuance here around achieve would be a much more understanding around purpose and self-fulfillment. So that would be becoming the best version of yourself would
yeah,
probably be the purpose. And then millennials would select organizations that can fulfill that.
yeah,
And because you and myself are getting grayer by the year, it's not going to be about us. It's going to be about those managers dealing with the workplace that are going to be more than 50% millennials over time. So I think you're
yeah,
spot on. But the nuance around this is the
yeah,
fact that purpose matters now more than ever.
definitely, definitely. Thanks for that.
Sure. Okay, so the whole idea about employee engagement, for those that are new to employee engagement, this is about looking at factors or environmental aspects that would enable people to bring more to the party. In other words, seek discretionary effort. So the thinking really is that people come to the workplace, they start off with an ambition to do a good job. The organization essentially needs to create the environment to enable them. Enabling them. And so what could that look like? And if you get it right, the upside of employee engagement is people bring discretionary effort to the workplace. In other words, they bring more effort than you pay them for. And
Yeah.
that's obviously good for organizational performance. And so that's really sort of what the employee engagement stuff looks at.
And I found a very interesting definition of trust recently that says it is the amount of discretionary effort that the person will devote to a particular topic. So
Yeah.
I found that was an interesting thing. So we need to learn to trust our organizations again, or for the
Yeah.
first time possibly.
Yeah, exactly. And now, can you imagine that if you entered the pandemic and you hadn't got those trust relationships in place, how much more difficult it is now during this phase where you can't see your folk. You
Yeah,
can't micromanage, you can't manage bums and seats and all that good stuff. Whereas managers who intuitively do the 12 elements anyway haven't had that problem nearly at the level that others have experienced. So,
awesome.
yep. Exactly. So some of the key concepts we've mentioned: employees have an innate need to achieve. And this really goes down to the heart of it, is that when you employ people, they don't arrive on day one trying to do a bad job. What happens afterwards that tends to switch them off. And so that's the organizational bit. We think that managers who are able to connect with this need achieve greater results. And so some of the key messages around managers you'll find in the book is that the days of saying, we will treat everybody equally and manage them in the same way is over. It is a recognition of uniqueness and unique needs of employees. So the key lessons distilled down from the 10 million sort of research interviews is you need to take the right management action, which is the 12 elements, and you need to build the dream team. In other words, engagement is not the only indicator for success, though it's a big one. You need to hire the right folk. You got to pay the right folk and you got to treat them in the right way. But there are these 12 management actions that you can take, and we'll jump straight in.
Cool.
So before we jump into the 12 steps, I just thought it would be quite useful if for those that haven't looked at employee engagement before, what's at stake? What is the value of it? So, what comes from the book is really these two things. Running a successful business boils down to ensuring your workers are productive, happy, and actively engaged. Now, notice we don't say paid well or the best. And there is this emphasis now on that happiness is a business criteria, which it never has been before. But intuitively, if you think of yourself as an employee for 2 seconds, do you want to work in a place that's productive, happy, and where engagement matters? Of course you do. So intuitively, this book was a big breakthrough at the time and ahead of the curve, but it really connects with intuitively what each human being really understands anyway. Then they go to work and it all gets messed up. And so all Gallup is saying is let's work with innate humanness and create conditions for people to thrive, and then you're going to get the best results. So that's sort of the proposition. And it's about encouraging the conditions to improve discretionary effort. Now, what you won't get in the book is up-to-date statistics, but Google is your friend. So I just pulled a quick stat from Gallup from around 2019, and you can see that if you get the employee engagement stuff right, your absenteeism drops significantly, your turnover drops, your shrinkage drops.
Well, hopefully your turnover doesn't drop too much.
Yes, in terms of employee turnover as opposed to revenue. Yeah,
So,
nice,
is there another type of turnover?
nice, nice. Well done. Shrinking, safety incidents. In actual fact, we're working with a client in Malawi where we're looking at how engagement can help them improve their safety record. They'll remain nameless, but they make cement, so safety is a key issue for them.
And there's a very interesting segment in the book around safety as well, specifically.
Yeah,
very interesting.
well, here's the correlation. If you're not engaged or motivated or connected with the organization, you basically don't care. And if you don't care, then the chances of having accidents is exponential. So from that perspective, it's quite important. Yeah. For us, from a business rationale point of view, the improvement in customer metrics, productivity, sales, and profitability is exceptional. So what's at stake from an engagement point of view is quite significant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Do you want to ask a question?
No, go for it.
Cool.
I'm here for you.
Thank you. So what are the 12 areas? So Gallup has turned this into an employee engagement survey, and they've run it. I mean, the stats are unbelievable. In over 96% of the countries of the world has some type of Gallup engagement survey data available. So this is thing being validated across the world. So it's based into several areas, starting with what do I get? So what is the propositional elements for me as an employee? What do I give? Do I belong? And how do we grow? Will be the 4 areas, engagement areas that managers need to operate or be able to enable to successfully drive employee engagement. And starts, so what Gallup has done, which is counterintuitive, is despite having 10 million interviews, their engagement survey questionnaire is only 12 questions. And their claim would be is that they spent years researching the best type of questions. And these are the ones that count in terms of performance. Whereas if you compare this with other engagement surveys, they're a lot longer. And so there's a particular view here. So starting with question 1, I know what is expected of me at work. Again, very simple questions, but powerful if you think about it. In our practice, when we work with clients, the average person gets lost between job description, the changing nature of the business, and what managers expect. And those 3 things never align to clearly tell people what is expected of them. There's always above the line, the job description, and you get into trouble from HR if you don't do that. And really what matters, what the manager thinks. And so there's still a lot of work to be done in that area. Yeah.
And I think that's I've been reflecting about things like OKR systems and goal systems that are coming in, and what I think the success factor there is that it changes the job away from being kind of mundane to knowing what is expected from me, and doing that in terms of setting goals and monitoring that. The book was quite interesting because it talked about inspection versus expectation, and I thought that was kind of an interesting view to say if you keep on inspecting something, you tend to get it because it is what you're communicating, what you're expecting. So, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. So the sort of what is expected, so the Gallup in the book would argue something like, if you have an open-minded view, if you expect people taking initiative, you're not going to get a job description response, and hence you don't have to micromanage. And so the question really is, you get exponential performance if you help people grow their position.
Yeah.
And that would be the expectation, especially around the discretionary effort point of view. But at the very least, Rian, some folk come to work without understanding what the value of their job is, where the organization is going, and what really is expected around things like what do you actually have to do and at what level. And so even doing simple things like that gets you a really good balance around the engagement piece. Because some managers, and we had it with the pandemic, would go, well, you're working from home, you know what you need to do, so I don't have to talk to you for several weeks.
Yeah.
Clearly, that's a bit of a short-sighted approach.
Yeah, and I kind of want to kick it back into the manager space. I don't think often managers know what is expected of them, especially, and it, it they don't know what they should be doing, what their job should be. So I think during the pandemic times that like got back into focus. I mean, there was whole organizations that I've spoke to that kind of were asking, well, why do we have these people at all?
Yes. And I mean, parking that to the side, all I'd say is that is a reality,
Yeah.
is that a lot of organizations discovered that people were working very hard in things that really were not valuable. That's
Mm.
not a precursor to telling people to leave. It's just an indictment of organizations not using their talent properly
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
particular ways. The other way to think a little bit about this is that historically we promoted managers because that's been the only route to promotion. And so we've always talked about the 80-20 rule with managers, which says something like this, is as a manager of people, you should spend 80% of your time on people and 20% on technical. Now, the reality is managers have been able to muddle through that by being 80% technical and 20% people. With the pandemic, they had no recourse to that. And so suddenly the 80-20 rule came into being, whether you liked it or not. And that's been sort of the intriguing thing, because now people were saying, well, hold on, do I really have to get to know my staff? Well, what an odd question. Of course you need to. Um, but now you have no choice, because they're sitting at the end of Zoom. They can switch you off. The power is in their hands.
Yeah.
And we've had some really bizarre conversations. We've had managers get hysterical because the person hasn't responded, then phones them only to discover that their employee is at a funeral parlor because there's been a bereavement. So there's been some tremendously awkward things happening.
Yeah. And I guess the kind of one-on-one on a collective basis also changes the paradigm of communication, where the manager isn't just running through the office shouting what is expected
Mm,
from people, and it turns it into a transactional. Hi, I'm sitting here, I'm talking to you. Now we can match
yeah.
expectations, and that changes the whole dynamic quite a lot.
Well, I think it's even better, if you think of that as sort of a balance between manager and employee, the balance has shifted to the employee now,
Exactly.
because you can switch the manager off. The manager, it's not just about the management needs, it's now about the manager sussing out the needs of individuals.
Mm.
So it's been quite a dramatic sort of change. Now, Gallup would argue in 2006 they were predicting that. I think
Okay.
it's taken us the pandemic to really understand the impact of some of this stuff. So
It makes you wonder if it should be a dismissible offense to switch off your Zoom.
some managers would argue that, and
Yeah.
some HR people have spent a lot of time thinking about policies. Our argument would be is it's difficult for the simple reason is that people will go, well, it's Vodacom, it's Eskom, it's load shedding. Good luck trying to make that stick. All I'm saying is it's not valuable use of your time, and I think we can spend it elsewhere.
Yeah.
That's probably the argument. Yeah. Cool.
Awesome.
So knowing what is expected of you, and then the second one really is having the materials and equipment that you need to be successful. And organizations think they have this, but it's not always the case. A good
Mm.
example in the pandemic is about organizations arguing in terms of policy terms about the fact about whether they are going to spend 400 Rand a month ensuring that people have a data connection. I'm
Mm.
going, you're insane. It's a ridiculous conversation. Do you want the person to be effective and work hard?
Yeah.
Yes, we do, but we don't want to set a precedent and pay for data. Okay, really, I mean,
Yeah.
what in my terminology, a very immature conversation. You need to be equipped with the right stuff, otherwise you're just not going to be engaged. And that goes from everything from your printer not working through to data to connectivity and so forth.
What I found quite fascinating in the book on this topic is that the whole idea of the virtual office was kind of a no-no in the early 2000s, and now that's coming into the fore. but what intrigued me is to say, well, the psychological safety factors of a virtual office is so much different now, and but still the company has a responsibility towards those psychological safety factors,
Yeah.
and then I find as we kind of exploring more remote work and people have freed up their flexible schedules, etc., that becomes quite intriguing because and challenging because what am I doing to keep it safe? An employee is living in a house with in a complex scenario, and all of a sudden it's visible that they come from a specific background, etc. While
Yeah.
at work they weren't that. Now does that stigmatize the whole thing, etc. So it becomes very this becomes a lot more relevant, I think, in a virtual work world than we thought it would
Yeah.
be.
And there are two sort of great examples of that, Rian. So you spot on. So the first is in Zoom meetings, we discovered that suddenly people have real live children.
Yeah.
And that's a reality. And the other one is that whether you now as a manager have to take account for people's well-being, but in a greater sense. So somebody's elderly parents have an impact on people's engagement. And so you can choose to ignore it historically, or you can say, well, hold on, how do I create a really understanding work-life balance here in
Yeah.
such a way that I can get what I need, but also make sure that the person's head's exploding doesn't explode. So, things like Zoom fatigue, expectation that you start answering emails at 6:30 in the morning and so forth. Those are the types of things that we'd really have to be cautioned about. And I see that the whole employee benefit scenario is going to change as this well-being stuff becomes more important, because you're going to have to take care of elderly parents. It is what it is. What's the joke? You can't live with family, but you can't kill them either. So yeah.
Okay. I'll take your word for it.
On that happy note, yes. Okay. So question 2 is really about materials. Then we move around, what do I give? And the what do I give is not just how hard I work, it's really what do I need to do the best of my ability. So question 3 is, do I do my best, or can I do my best every single day? And the question is really premised on this idea that I have certain innate capacities and talents. Can I use them every single day, or am I in a wrong job in a broom cupboard that expects me to do something that doesn't use my talents at all? And I think this really poses challenges to traditional organizational design. Because a lot of what happens is there's a mismatch between what people are great at and what their day jobs ask them to do.
Yeah, and I found, okay, so I mean, I guess we all go through life and it's a bit of a progression. And in the beginning, you do jobs that are not necessarily your best work,
Yeah.
or at the level that you believe that you can operate, and then eventually you kind of find your space, etc. So,
Yeah.
and I find it challenging when young employees come in and sit there and say, "But I'm not doing everything that I could do." And it's like 9 times out of 10, it is well, it's because you're not doing what you're supposed to do yet. Okay,
Yeah.
you kind of have to cross that hoop. But kind of looking at it from a slightly different perspective, and kind of looking more at a managerial level, which is where we're talking here. I find it very interesting to kind of match the right person to the right job, which it was when I was reading this, so that came to my mind is to say, well, we have a far bigger matching problem now, because people have such diverse interests and can express themselves in a very different way. So
Mm.
it's not about putting the right person to the right job description anymore. It's more around saying, well, what value can you bring into my organization? How can I best utilize that? And how
Yeah.
can we kind of build the organization around the people that work here, which is such a untraditional notion.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly what we're saying around turning organizational design on its head. So we don't want to fit people in boxes. Rather, we're going to give them some opportunity to create a lot more fluid notion of structure and contribution. So, yeah.
It's like the traditional notion is that, well, the person's the role. Okay, we have to separate these two things, and that's kind of been the mantra of, in my life, and consulting and organizational design, process control, all of those types of things. Is I don't care who the individual is. It's about the process and what you can achieve efficiently. But that's now kind of going out of the window very fast.
Well, so there is, I think that's right. I think so what's in it for you to change is the fact that get far more, you get much better performance when people are engaged around their own work design. So I think what you're going to get is a more democratic approach to around, how best to sort out the work. And we see it often with teams. That's not the process that unravels. What happens is you discover who should be at what end of the process, and who can contribute where. And how, and so you get unexpected upsides to that. Suddenly you discover that somebody is great at executing but not good at relationship building, or vice versa, and gives you a sense that what drives performance is the team dynamic rather than the actual work, even though the work has to be sorted out. Yeah.
And is that where your strengths analysis come in?
Yeah, that is actually the point. So if you know what talents you have, or what strengths that you have, or what you bring to the party, you can play to that. And managers can then create an intentional situation where they can create opportunities for you to be the best version of yourself. Now, nobody's saying that means that suddenly now you're not going to have to do some of the horrible jobs that come with any job, like link, in the old days, licking stamps, kissing babies, or stamping multiple forms. Sort of those stereotypes around the time. So I think that we're looking for a bottom up build rather than a top down micromanage. And I know that you've spent a lot of time in the space, but the management theory is either X or Y. Either you believe that people should be micromanaged or controlled strictly, because then you get sort of widgets coming out the other end, or people that go, well, hold on, if we got great talent, what else can we get out of them? People can make decisions, they can be autonomous, they can do, and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
And one of our guests, just in tour, is saying, well, isn't there another extreme to this in terms of saying that I can care too much, and that also impacts performance? And I think it relates to some of the other questions here, like somebody encourages my development, somebody cares, I've received recent recognition. So how do we what we get taught in management is that I'm the manager. I create a space between myself and the employees, and I should just talk about performance. I should just psych people up around where we're going. I don't really see people as a way to get to a place, but how do we navigate that water?
Yeah, so I'm always amazed by, and Giselle, please, I'm not saying that you do this, but I'm intrigued by how people use language. So my weakness is that I care about people. So the book and Gallup would say that's counterintuitive. It's a strength that you care about your people. Now, Gallup, because they are a commercial enterprise and they're not a faith-based organization, would say the following, is that unequivocally the reason why we do this is because we want to hold people accountable for their performance and delivery. So sitting behind this is, and going back to the book, it's the elements that are going to get you to that place where people perform better. And now, because they come from America, where the labor laws are far less onerous than ourselves, they have little patience for people that don't perform. So they would say, if you do this stuff and people still don't perform, it's not about kumbaya, hugging and kissing people. It's about saying, go and get somebody else that can do the job. So accountability fits very strongly behind this pyramid.
But I guess to Giselle's point is, what often happens is, and especially during COVID, I mean, we figured out that we all have a lot of stuff to do in our lives.
Yes.
Okay, so and manage screen time accordingly. Okay, but now it's people have this long list of other things that's important to them in life, and we've all reevaluated how we view relationships,
Yeah.
and what's important to us in life. But now, kind of getting to that next level, it seems that now that we're going back into offices, etc. But those kind of at-home demands haven't diminished, etc. So it's like, how do we still keep on prioritizing the important elements of caring,
Mm.
and the objective delivery, as you said, the hard view to say, oh, I'm not really employing you to take care of those things. I'm employing you to get an output at the end of the day. And yeah.
Yeah. So, Darian, I mean, that's the power question here. It's great to know the areas of engagement, but the sort of, it begs the question about now, how do you go about ensuring that, given that things like flexibility are important. So my view would be is that there's going to be quite a lot of tears for no other reason that people are going to go back to the office and they're going to reinstate the old way of doing it, and that ship's sailed. I don't think we can think that way. I think the honesty lies around how do we develop people to maturely take on a much more flexible approach to work. So there's a development question for managers on how to do this, but there's also a maturity and decision-making prioritization development issue for employees. And I think the two go hand in hand in this brave new world that we're going into. The reality is, whether you like it or not, is that maybe your children loved having you around and they want to still see you around. So it's been sort of stark before and after types of impacts.
Yeah, absolutely. Luckily, some of them still go to school.
Yes. Yes, no, and every parent in South Africa goes, well, how quickly can we get back? So
Yeah.
absolutely. So it's a bit like, when in the strengths assessment, one of the strengths is empathy and harmony. Sometimes top executives, you get that in their top 10 suddenly feel emasculated because the perception is empathy and harmony are somehow weaker than strategic and achiever, for example.
Yeah.
And the reality is it's not. They're equally tough in their own way, is that they just show up in different aspects. I do know that at the moment, if you have empathy high in your talent basket as a manager, and you're ahead of some of the rest of us that are much more task and execution facing.
Um, Yendor, looking at kind of the do I belong group, connecting with the mission and purpose of my company,
Yep.
getting everybody to work together. That sounds to me like um, that is it's a massive area, and it resonates with a lot of people. Like, do I belong?
Yep.
Yeah. What would be your advice to somebody that feels that they don't belong?
Yeah, and I was thinking about it as I was preparing for this. So a couple of things, so good organizations would say your employee opinions seem to count. Now, what we mean by that is not that I get surveyed every year and be told that I should be happy, but that if I say something, people will notice.
Yeah.
That there is a mission and purpose of the company, and the purpose is not to make as much money as possible. I think we're beyond those sort of investment banking, financial services, king of the world type stuff. My co-workers are of a particular quality. They're not. It's very hard to be engaged when everybody around you is sitting down and not doing their work. And then key, I have a best friend at work, and I'll come back to that because in the book, this question has been quite controversial. And so there's always nice when you do a book review to be controversial, and I'll come back to that. If you don't belong, then the reality is that I think you should be going to do other things. I'll give you an example. When I was still in corporate in Barclays, I had to go to Dubai because the regional head office for my area moved there. And I spent the most uncomfortable week there trying to fit into an office arena that was culturally very different, that was going in a very different direction to what I believed was important, and I had the loneliest week ever. And coming out of that, I based my decision to move from Barclays to do something else because the organization had gone in a direction I couldn't fit in or accommodate anymore. And I think that's the reality. So that's the one way. The other way is just how far, is it something that you can contribute to realigning and finding a space where you can belong? A lot of times that's about you making a best friend at work and so forth.
I find that the question 7, at work, my opinion seems to count, is like probably the most important engagement um, methodology, or uh, like if we are in a team meeting, sitting and listening to everybody and putting action behind everything that is said, so that people learn how to that what they say actually does count. I think that that's a kind of very powerful way that I've seen it work. And I think during COVID, it's also much nicer. And as we said earlier, the kind of one-to-one engagement model creates a space in which you kind of have to notice that I've said something, and
Mm.
now let's do something about it. Because I'm always fascinated when I hear in organizations that supposedly want to become learning organizations that somebody's been having an opinion for a couple of years and
Mm.
it still hasn't happened, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And it's the old adage really is don't ask somebody unless you're willing to do something about it. So a
yeah,
lot of organizations do the right thing. They do an employee engagement survey and they go, right, 50% of us love this place, so that's what we're going to focus on, forgetting that the other 50% says, listen, we don't like it here.
yeah.
And then you totally ignore that because it's uncomfortable and you don't want to do anything about it. So when we talk about opinions, it's the respect component of building the trust that I think you were talking about earlier. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Cool. Okay.
So
I think,
let me just
yeah,
go up and then I'll come back to the controversy, which is always the nice
sure.
one to have a look at. So, do I belong? I think that connection, you've got to have a connection with the organization. Now, it's true to say that many of us in South Africa work for organizations because we have to work rather than the best organizations in the world. And I think there is a trade off, but it can't be too extreme. And then the top questions is how do we grow? So progress in the last 6 months is not promotion up the food ladder. This is about have I made progress in my skills, my development, who I am as a human being, what I can do, and the opportunities available. And then are there opportunities to learn and grow? So premise behind engagement in the book is this notion that management is primarily there to do things, hold people accountable for performance, and develop the capacities to do so. So it's a developmental approach that becomes quite important.
I find an interesting challenge in that we always somehow are trying to create the notion that you are not where you need to be. You need to be somewhere else over time,
Yeah.
and that's, I think, is increasingly for some people, especially if they love what they're doing
Mm.
and they're doing most of it. It's becoming a challenging thing to sit and say, actually, I really like what I'm doing, and I don't necessarily want to grow. And when I do, it doesn't always make me happy. And I've recently seen a lot more of that, just
Yeah.
engaging in different spaces, and I find that interesting. It's like people have found their niche,
Yeah.
maybe because they're now working at home, etc. It's like I'm comfortable. I don't want this to change. I don't want it to be different. I,
And the reality is, I mean, the studies have shown that 80% of your performance comes from 20% of your employees anyway. Or the other way of thinking about it is that you want the majority of your people to come to work, do the best job they can do, and be happy doing that. So let's not stir where we don't have to scratch where we don't have to scratch. But having said all that, we shouldn't ignore people that are solid citizens doing a great job because growth could be in other things. It doesn't just have to be hierarchical or into management, which blesses. I think it's an incredibly tough job to aspire to.
Yeah, but I almost feel like we take these last two questions and we put it in to performance reviews, and that's
Yeah,
not where it belongs at all,
no,
because
not at all.
that becomes it becomes rote, meaningless, and I know that I need to, if I have a performance review, put it in there,
Mm,
because otherwise I'm just gonna look like somebody that isn't. So I think
yeah.
kind of to an earlier point, to say like with goal systems and those types of things, this is becoming a lot more organic in organizations and should be less kind of
Yeah.
structured.
So what you'll note, and I think that's a great point, Rian, what you'll notice with the 12 questions are the 12 elements of what managers do. You don't see any of the 12 indicating a performance management approach.
Yeah.
So that performance management is an HR process that HR imposes on the organization to do other things, which is find out in theory who's performing, and being able to reward people. The 12 things here, or the 12 elements, are what managers need to do. So it's almost like the new manager job description, I suppose.
Yeah, awesome. I like it. I like it a lot.
Excellent.
Cool.
I know that I don't want to run out of time, and I want to give some opportunities for some questions, but the controversy.
Yeah.
So a lot of the engagement stuff is pretty intuitive. It resonates and connects with a lot of people and so on, but except the one question. So this item, I have a best friend at work, is the one that's controversial in the book.
Yeah, when I first read it, I also thought like, interesting. I mean, and then I like went through my stuff and like wondering, okay, who's their best friends? They're at work.
Exactly. So here's a couple of things that make people feel uncomfortable. So from an HR perspective, you write policy from what happens if somebody does something wrong perspective, i.e. the Ministry of No. This is uncomfortable because it might lead to fraternization. So, but the research is clear. You work better if you have in South African terminology, you have a mate. Yeah. And it's not, it is precisely this. I have a best friend at work. So in answering this item, many employees do not stumble over the word friend because they have many friends at work. Instead, they get stuck on the word best because they feel the term implies exclusivity and they have trouble identifying one best friend amongst coworkers.
Okay.
Having said all that, Gallup discovered that the power of this item in identifying talented work groups, that the strongest agreement occurred in most productive work groups. Because some employees had difficulty with the word best, Gallup went back to those groups and looked at close or good, or excluded the word best entirely. When this was done, however, the item lost its power to differentiate highly productive work groups from mediocre work groups. This suggested that the word used best actually pinpoints a dynamic of great work groups. So this macho adage that you can work in a group that you don't like because you're macho and self-reliant and resilient, yeah, you can, but it's hard. It's probably what I take from that.
No, absolutely, and I mean, I think we've seen it like the notion of having a work wife or work husband because you spend more time with them,
Exactly.
and you know what each other are thinking all the time. Doesn't mean it has to not be platonic, but I mean that reality is there.
Yeah, and look, if the boundaries become unclear, then there's an HR policy that says thou shalt not. So let's not write policy from a management point of view. Let's look at what you as a manager can be proactive around. And so encouraging people to be friendly with each other is not a bad thing, is what the takeout of this. Now, no manager is going to get all 12 right at maximum volume. So, there may be a journey or a process. Wimpo says something quite interesting around. He says, sometimes you find yourself as an employee, your new ideas not being recognized because of old organizational ethics and culture. I mean, I think that's spot on. What the pandemic has done is I think it's shown us the emperor without clothes. The reality of some organization stuff doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I guess it's I think if you're smart enough to see that, then you're smart enough to work out how to get noticed in in putting your ideas forward and taking initiative. I mean, I think the biggest challenge and also in the book it talks about it. It's to say, I can call people to quality standards. I can call people to work harder, to work at my level, and then you naturally become a leader. You become the manager. So you can make it happen.
And I think there are two elements of that, Rian, just to build on that. And I totally understand what Umpo is saying. It's not easy. But as a manager, if your blind spot is that you don't know what others bring to the table, you're not going to be a great manager. And vice versa, as an employee, if you know what you can bring and you know what your needs of your manager are, you can craft a conversation that I think can be quite positive. Having said all that, I think we need a little bit of forgiveness to managers and to organizations at this stage. We have turned the world upside down with the pandemic, and it's going to take them a while. And where I say there's going to be need for forgiveness, as much as we're asking them as employees to be kind to us now, we need to forgive them with the fact that they're not always going to get it right.
Cool.
Yeah.
Tell us about the importance of affiliation.
Right. So, behind this best friend thing, here are some of the numbers about why it's so important. Is, if you get this stuff right, 43% are more likely to receive praise or recognition. And I'm not talking about the stuff that you see on TV from Disney where everything's awesome. This is proper recognition of the job well done. Encourages development, commitment to quality, and so on. So again, what's at stake around the engagement and a little bit behind the best friend to work. Now, when I did the best friend stuff with the Gallup guys, I mean, I felt a bit under pressure because at that stage I didn't have a best friend at work, and it was unlikely that I was ever going to. And I suppose one of the reasons for why we're now running BHG and not there anymore is because of that. So, I think this stuff resonates.
Interesting. Very interesting.
The reality, guys, is that we need to rethink about what it means to be a manager. So the take out of all this is that you can measure the Q12, but if your managers don't have the skills and expertise and the capacity to put this stuff into place, it's not going to work. There's a shift from the hierarchical traditional notion of the manager as a boss to much more around workplace coaching. We need to make sure that management training is now more relevant than ever. I know, Rian, that talks to a little bit what you guys are doing at SGI. And then, of course, you've got to have the right folks. So it's the balancing act of management that becomes quite important. For those, Rian, for those that want to explore this a bit more, you can go to the Gallup webpage and download the manager experience as an additional piece of collateral. It works quite nicely with the book.
Okay, awesome. And then you guys do this type of assessment as well?
Yeah. Part of what we do with our clients is that we would help them to do several things. One is understand and use the Q12 survey itself, so we understand what is good and what is bad, and then, of course, help the organization build the capacity to drive engagement. So that's working with managers. The research around the Gallup stuff is unequivocal. About 70% of the variability in employee engagement comes directly from what managers do around these 12 things. And so we would run capacity building programs and so forth.
Okay.
Often what happens is that we would add this type of viewpoint to existing leadership development programs. So you don't have to chuck the baby in the bathwater out to apply this.
Cool.
I know we've got 8 minutes left, but I just want to give you a bit of a summary around why I think this book's important and some of the things that maybe it doesn't cover. So I think it's quite good in terms of an introduction to the importance of employee engagement. I think it convincingly links engagement to the performance. We've been talking about that for the hour. It describes the 12 elements of engagement that matter for managers. And I think it provides useful management stories and examples. So it's written in quite an accessible way, and the stories are powerful. And of course, it's deeply research-based. Overall, an easy and accessible business read, so something you can put on your nightstand and read quite easily. Though having said that, I think having some background to employee engagement will add greater insight to your reading. Tells what to measure rather than what to do about it. So, it doesn't solve the problem about those management skills that are important. But as like all great organizations, it's written in a follow-up book called It's the Manager, where it answers that question. And it's probably best read in conjunction with other Gallup reads in terms of particularly the updated data around engagement, which I've shared a little bit in this hour.
Perfect.
So that brings us to the end of the review.
Good. Awesome. Sure. I've really learned something. Please feel free to ask some questions. We also we're doing some strength assessments with you guys as well as SGI. So we are working to bring kind of more strengths-based and positive psychology. So on our website, you can see our offerings on strengths, and I think it's also we want to look at ways that students can use strengths to teach. So it's a different kind of space, but it's also around student as an engagement. So if you're working to your strengths, you know what to study, etc. So I think we kind of subscribe to what you guys are up to. I see Giselle is typing us another question. Anybody else? Please feel free just to put it in there. We've got a knowledgeable expert in the room. So anything that you want, we've got another 5 minutes or so. And kind of just on that, you do a lot of work in Africa. What do you see as the kind of engagement? Is it happening? Is African organizations redefining engagement, or are we kind of stepping into the hierarchical view of the world?
So 54 countries in Africa, I think the markets vary quite considerably. In the more sophisticated markets, we're seeing that engagement is an issue that executives are taking very seriously. In actual fact, it's probably got to the stage, particularly in South Africa, where it's seen as almost old hat. In other markets, we're still engagement is a tricky concept where patriarchy, hierarchy, and sort of worldviews around that my position is my authority tends to hinder the view around engagement. But we're seeing that rapidly changing, and the challenge is coming from your friends, the millennials. We see, and we're working with an incredible cadre across Africa of unbelievably strong women that are coming through now, that are challenging, the stereotypes and so on, and often having to bump heads in organizations and then spinning out and starting fantastic businesses in their own right. So, yeah, it's interesting.
I came across. Okay. I see. Carol has a question. Sometimes best friends is being misinterpreted. Best friends feel that you cannot be reprimanded when you're wrong at fault.
No, yeah, Carol, I understand. I understand why you say that, but best friends means a trust, intimacy relationship.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that you can't give feedback. And herein lies something that's mission critical behind the scenes, is the way that you give feedback now is mission critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we see a lot of emerging research around the idea of psychological safety, and that is also in that space where it's I should have a space at work where I do feel safe.
Yeah.
Okay. It doesn't mean that we necessarily cover each other. But so I don't think it comes from that kind of perspective, but inside this is a co-conspirator in in my negative side of things.
Best friends doesn't mean that you can't be honest with each other. It's how you're honest. If you, I always play this game when we do values exercise with people. I say, well, how honest are you? And my answer to this is quite simple. If you're 100% honest all the time, you will have no friends. Fact. But sometimes, you need to tell people off and let them enjoy the journey a little bit. And that's the feedback mechanism around managers, especially where managers have other managers as best friends.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, just on a kind of interesting note, and to your previous point in terms of saying millennials are taking things differently, we recently spoke to a CEO of an organization that has about 20,000 employees, and he's now having the top 100 teams report to him. Okay, not necessarily the team is the entity. It is not the manager anymore. So I think that was a very interesting perspective, that we're changing the nature of command and control away from the manager. But it doesn't mean that this principle of managing, and that's what I like about the book in terms of saying it's 12 elements of great managing, not necessarily being the best manager. I guess is how you manage.
No, exactly right. I think that's absolutely spot on.
Cool.
Very good.
Okay, good. Okay. Yendor, thanks so much for joining us and for your valuable time. For our guests, thank you for your time. It's very nice having you here. And as always, we do this regularly, so we see you at our next book club. There is also past book clubs that you can access, so reviews of books very similar to this, in different topics, ranging from neuroscience and behavioral psychology to different aspects of leadership, etc. The recording of this will be available afterwards, and lovely for you to join us. And I'm looking forward to seeing you as one of our students these days. Thank you, Yendor, for your time.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
I really enjoyed being here. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much. Okay.
Cheerio.
All the
Bye-bye.
best. Cheers. Bye.